Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Trend SPL Reporting Systems webinar presented by TC Furlong. We are happy everyone can join us today. Before we get started, I'd like to make a couple quick introductions. So first off, I am Brian Grahn with the TC Furlong Sales and Marketing team and your host for the day. For those not familiar, TC Furlong is a Chicago area-based live sound company. We handle equipment sales and rentals, live event production, and a handful of other services, including system design, repairs, and more. Today, we are joined by longtime industry colleague and friend of the company, Chris Gille. Chris is the inventor of the TREND software and now is the systems architect / special projects lead / creative ninja at the Kentucky-based AV integrator Houseright. I think a good place to start would be a little background on SPL measurements, policies, and exposure, Chris.
Okay, well, for starters on why measure at all is some of the highlights to that would be for some consistency. The only way to be consistent and to know that we're consistent is to measure even through the course of a day. The energetic levels, the amount of people in a room can affect the optimum level, and to know what the level variations are to log them even from event to event within a day, but also it's very insightful to see what happens over the course of a year or multiple years. One reason to measure is consistency. Another one is because we care. We want to be professionals. We want to be responsible. And whether we're talking about levels that are actually of any exposure concern or not, for us to know whether they are or not is worth logging, monitoring, and recording so that we are being professionally responsible for what everyone that comes through our rooms is being exposed to, and that we are the most versed and the most knowledgeable on what that is. Therefore, we have our own peace of mind, and then we are also very well informed and equipped for anyone that has concerns or complaints or questions or curiosities. And when they ask about how loud was that, or have you considered OSHA, or doesn't that seem like it was really loud or dangerous? Not only do we have a comforting comment, but we also have all of the data to whatever level of depth is appropriate there to help support that. And then yeah, I would say those are the top reasons why I personally find measuring is very helpful.
That's great. Hopefully my internet's a little more stable now. Chris, let's talk about the TREND package. So what comes with a TREND system?
All right. TREND is software that runs on Mac OS X. And it is software that pings the meter for data and brings the data into the computer. This package also includes the Galaxy CM170 meter, this guy. And the two work together over a USB connection. The USB provides power to the meter, which is nice. So if you have batteries or not, as long as you're connected to USB, USB takes care of power, and then once the meter's on, the power stays on 24/7 as long as the computer is powered on, as well as all of the data connection is over USB. So the system includes the TREND software, the CM170 meter, and a soft license, which is the license that allows the number of windows to run on the computer.
That's great. Why don't we go ahead and take a look at the TREND software on your computer here, Chris.
Okay. And I think I'll add to that too, just one more little glimpse into when we talk about why measure, I'll talk about what measuring is also just for a moment here. Let me get into screen sharing. Okay. And these will just be a couple of quick reference things. When we talk about measuring at all, many countries and areas of the world have their own standards. Here's just a short list of some of the standards. but it's kind of insightful to see that everyone around the world is, striving for their own versions of what they consider to be safe and healthy, but also appropriate. And then some of these also have military concerns and residential nuisance concerns and things like that. But it's fascinating to see around the world all the different flavors of that going on. Another thing to comment on would be weightings. So you can measure SPL in Z weighting or flat, but most commonly in the US we use A and C weighting. C is closer to flat because it does consider all of the low end, most of the low end. But what's most commonly used is A weighting, which is a filter that's put on the meter to focus on the mid-ranges, particularly those that can be the most potentially damaging to human hearing. Another way to say that would be is it ignores the lows and focuses on the mids and highs. You can see that C and A, this is a very just rough drawing, but it shows that they converge at 1K, which is the area of most interest between these two. So OSHA and NIOSH and other US agencies will be using A weighting, which means the meter itself, before we even get the data, can be set to look at the mid-ranges. Brian, would this be a good time to talk about exposure real quick before we talk about how the meter sees that?
Yeah, that sounds great.
Okay. Here's a chart that shows the permissible noise exposure that as defined by OSHA. So when we're talking about volume levels, it's not, this one of the things I wanted to cover before we talk about the meter. Any of us can have a meter sitting on our soundboard and the numbers diving around, taps 104 sometimes and then sits at 67 to 73 for speech. And those are very wide ranges, and the numbers even in slow are darting around. That can be helpful if we're just trying to mix below a ceiling. But what's actually measured and of interest is how much volume over time, or noise exposure over time. So when we're just looking how OSHA would measure that, if you're driving loud machinery, operating loud machinery, or in a noisy factory for long periods of time, OSHA in occupational health would look at something like this, and it has defined this as what is the threshold of becoming unsafe. And so this chart just shows the relationship between volume level and time. So 90 dBA slow would be allowed for 8 hours or a full day work shift with breaks, versus the other end of the scale is 115 dB is technically allowed for 15 minutes before you have used your entire day's allotment of exposure. So both of those are a full day's dose of exposure. Both of those are considered the safe limit, but this is a way to view how you can be relatively loud for 8 hours for a long period of time, or you can be extremely loud for a short period of time, or anywhere in between. You can see how the scale works out, as well as if you have a portion of your exposure at a quiet level and a portion of your exposure at a loud level, that the combination of those things are actually what make up the whole day's exposure. And that would be measured in percentage. What percentage did your job use of your daily safety allotment that day? And then it's up to you to personally manage. You go to a loud concert that night, what percentage of the loud concert was in addition to your workday, or driving a truck with the window down for 4 hours, or loud kids screaming and playing for 2 hours. All those kinds of things are contributing to your dosage, your daily percentage. And OSHA would say, well, how does that compare to this chart with all the data we have so far of, are you at risk or not? Are you being healthy or taking risks? And now we can look at the trend meter, and you're seeing my screen okay? Yep.
Yep.
I got one little thing in the way here for a second. Okay, it's stuck there, no problem. Okay, this is the trend meter. This is the basic view. So if you launched the trend software, it would show up like this. I already have the meter I showed you hooked up to it. So this is live right now. And the trend software not only just brings in the dB coming from the meter, it gives you these green, yellow, and red tick marks. This is all adjustable in preferences that we'll take a look at in a second. Green being the threshold, yellow being whatever level you want when you want things to turn yellow to catch your eye or bring warning or attention to something. And then red, same thing, when you want things to turn red, use it as a limiter or use it as a warning or put it wherever you like. So as I move the mic closer, I'm talking louder, and I'm going to hit the threshold. And to talk about threshold for just a second, in noise exposure, there's a threshold for where noise is considered contributing at all to exposure or not. So all this time right now, when it's blue, I'm below the threshold. This exposure timer at the bottom that's in red has stopped. That means all of this noise right now does not even count. OSHA doesn't care about it. Our meter doesn't care about it. The exposure part of the meter doesn't care about it. But as soon as I cross the threshold with level like this, the accumulating timer at the bottom is saying, oh, okay, these seconds have levels that are over the threshold and they all count as exposure. So they count towards that percentage. So we have two timers going. One is how long since the last reset, but the other one is how long have we had levels that are over the threshold. And you may have noticed as soon as I tapped the threshold, this little green arrow and numbers showed up next to it. That meant that we've had some accumulation in the average, the time-weighted average, and that is what makes Trend unique, is it's taking this regular SPL meter and turning it into a legitimate dosimeter. Not only do we have level, but we're doing the math to show the average over time. And then, so this right here would be saying 84.1 dB has been the average of all levels over the threshold for a total of 1 minute and 7 seconds. So a way to say that would be TWA 84.1, 1 minute and 7 seconds. Out of this 5-minute event, only 1 minute has counted towards exposure, and the exposure equivalent was 84 dB, even though we've had peaks as high as 90 and lows as low as 60. And then we get up into the yellow, we see things light up yellow and red. And also, as we're louder, we can see that TWA is climbing rapidly because we're pouring very high levels into that average right now. And it's the combination of the live level and the TWA that really reveal overall, at the end of the day, how loud was the experience overall. Not just did we hit 100 peak a few times, but the actual experience overall.
That's great. So when you're putting together a policy, are you typically looking at a goal TWA as well as a peak level that you're going to try to keep within bounds?
Excellent. I do believe that both of those belong in a policy. I have one I can pull up here. Here's one for Eastside Christian Church in Anaheim. We don't need to read through this whole thing, but it does touch on exactly what you just said. It's a commitment. It's a promise that anyone that comes into the room for an event or a service will be exposed to less than this policy. So it's an in-house policy. And then this policy also says we use OSHA, and Eastside will come in less than OSHA. And then furthermore, they consider OSHA's Hearing Conservation Amendment, which is even more conservative. And Eastside promises to expose anyone that comes in less than that. And then furthermore, Eastside will consider NIOSH, the Occupational Noise Exposure, Occupational Safety and Health. And then you just get these more furthermores. But the idea is that you write your own policy that says if for some reason this venue actually was subject to OSHA noise exposure and occupational health, they would look over your shoulder, they would see this policy, they would see your meters, but they wouldn't care about what the meter's doing necessarily as much as that average. And they would see, oh, your average is less than ours, and you've completely spelled out what our standard even is, plus used two other standards. So things like this are great language to have in place. Rarely does it actually get asked for or come up, but it's just an anchor point for reference. And then down here, it does spell out some of the equivalents, like what if our normal service went for all day long? Or what if we were allowed to actually turn it up as loud as OSHA says we could? And then you get into some of these crazy numbers. Well, you know, our 30-minute service could have been 108 dB for the whole time. And then as well as peaks. So there's a commitment that these guys made to not peak over 105 A weighted, and then not peak over 130 C, which sounds crazy loud, but in C weighting, if your subs are going, if you're really rocking the subs and your room resonates at a certain frequency and you light that frequency up, then it's pretty easy to see crazy spikes like that. So they wouldn't be harmful. They would be, you know, quite the experience. But it is still, it deserves to have a number out there to say the peaks will be within this, the average will be within this, and then here are all the equivalents of that experience. It just shows that you're just, you know, due diligence, really carrying ahead of the question.
All right, that's great. So we've talked a lot about some of these different noise standards. Can you show us how that is set within the trend parameters though? Like how can we see that this is using OSHA parameters versus NIOSH or something else like that? Can you show us a little bit of that, Chris?
Great. Okay. Under trend, under options, under parameters, we'll open the parameter window, and we have the parameter window set, pardon me, set under the OSX admin password. So every time you go in there, you'll authorize it so other people can't mess with the settings. Here we pick which meter we're talking to. And then in this measurement parameters, you can see the left column is a standard, and those are bolted down. Those are hard coded into the software. So if I use OSHA permissible exposure limit, the PEL, it'll automatically drop in those parameters where this particular one says that we're allowed 90 dB for 8 hours with an exchange rate of 5, and the threshold is 90. So everything under 90 doesn't count. Everything over 90 will contribute to an average, and we're allowed an average of 90 for 8 hours. And then over in this trend column, we can copy those over, and the trend column decides what the meter shows and what the TWA average pointer shows. But both of these columns will be pouring into the emails and the logs and those other things we can talk about in a moment. So in the trend column, we can customize this too. Let's say we want PEL OSHA in the left, but we want NIOSH in the right, or OSHA in the left and something very conservative in the right. Then you can create your own policy or use somebody else's policy, or Europe has some of the quietest standards in the world. Let's use that because it doesn't get any safer than that as a standard. So we can put Europe in there, the EE standard. And that'll define the average pointer and then all the logs, and particularly the rate at which the exposure percentage gets levels applied to it against a person's total exposure limit. And you can pick here which level the meter will turn yellow at and turn red at, and a few other settings exposure related if you're really working against a policy like that.
Chris, I want to backtrack real quick.
Sounds good.
One of the things I know that Trend does is when you set your standard for weighting, for instance, that's automatically going to change the settings in the meter. Is that correct?
Oh, good point. That's right. So these digital meters have settings on them and buttons usually right on them for fast, slow response, or AC waiting response. And if the meter's not connected to anything, then you have to check all those settings every time you pick up the meter. Whereas once they're digitally connected to Trend, because of these parameters, when the program is running, it is forcing the meter settings. So it becomes tamper-proof. If I hit the AC waiting switch right now, within an eighth of a second, the meter is forced back to the correct settings. So that's a good point, and that's saved in the file. So as long as there's powered up, everything else is going to be set correctly to make sure that all this information is true.
And going into that a little deeper, we're using the meter calibration specs from the factory. So we're not worrying about calibrating anything into the Trend software. It's all happening in the meter, and then that data is just getting transferred over to Trend. Is that correct?
Yep. Another excellent point. Since the beginning of this adventure, approaching 20 years now, which is hard to believe, there was a commitment to let a meter be a meter, because they've gone through the whole certification process, the calibration process. They have to meet certain standards to even claim to be a meter in the first place. And that includes a calibratable mic, a mic capsule that can fit in a calibrator, as well as calibration offsets that can be tested and adjusted. And if a meter is just sitting somewhere indoors, completely untouched for years, I still recommend confirming or adjusting your calibration once or twice a year. And some standards will require that. But because it's a meter, a legitimate meter, the calibration happens at the meter and is stored in the meter, and then Trend is just getting the truth from that meter. So unlike some other systems that offer different advantages but also handle it different ways, there's not an I/O interface, there's not a gain stage, there's not a gain knob or a digital gain that needs to be adjusted, which would also have to be additionally checked for calibration accuracy. The meter's the meter, tomorrow's going to look the same as today, and then we just roll with the trusted data from that and present the more powerful information behind it.
That's great. All right, let's look at a little bit of the, now that we've seen the trend window and the measurement parameter settings, how we can log some of this data from the Trend software. Can you show us that, Gille?
Great. In this next tab, in this same parameters window, in this other tab here are some more options, including logging and reporting. Actually, let me go back to this other tab here. Let me check something real quick. Okay. This in the upper right, and I'm not sure how, you don't need to see it in detail, I'll just talk about it as an overview. But as long as Trend is running, there are several logs that can be running simultaneously. One of them is an interval log, which we can say 1 minute up to 30 minutes. So as soon as we turn that on, every single minute that Trend is running will be entering a log entry under the interval log. If we click always, it means it's not only going to record during events, but it's going to record 24/7. This can be handy if someone's, rocking the PA at 1 a.m. and disturbing neighbors or something. You actually will get a log of that in the middle of the night, even though there's no event going on. You can also do 1 second logging for extremely high resolution analysis, or if you're curious about something that's going wrong, or some interesting phenomenon, you can capture it that way. Exposure intervals, reset intervals, all these things pour into different logs. So simultaneously, there's multiple spreadsheets being automatically created in the background and automatically populated by all these different categories. And besides that, there is a limit. Here we have an email when level exceeds. So if we type in 105, then every time the level goes over 105, it'll email you if you choose to, and it'll create a new log entry within a special log that's called level exceeded. So there's quite a variety of data available, and it's separated out like that by type. And then in the email addresses, if you wanted it to email more than one person at a time, you can type in multiple email addresses, me at so-and-so and Brian at TC Furlong, and you just separate those out with commas, but then any one of these kinds of events that happen will also send out an email with a summary and a notification.
That's
What
great.
else should we look at on that?
Can you show us what an example email might look like?
Okay.
Whether it's from a full event or from a specific, or I guess from a full capture or a specific event that might have triggered it.
Great. I'm going to pop this open super quick, which leads up to that. Here is a example of a log. And not to walk all the way through it, but just the kind of data that's going into this log. This is an interval log. So it's timestamping every minute. And in this interval log, each minute, here's the Hollywood Bowl as an example from a microphone at the conductor's position, which is one of the loudest spots in that 17,000 space venue. It's pretty amazing to run analysis from where the conductor stands, and the being in a bowl and surrounded by an entire orchestra. It's tremendous, and often rock bands with them too. The accumulating average that's happening, how many seconds contributed to that average, the maximum level that happened at that moment. Let me pick a few other interesting one. The accumulating percentage of exposure. So here we can see 0.1%, and then after several more minutes, 0.2, and then something loud happens down here, 0.3, 0.4, 0.5, 0.6. So something louder is happening there, taking up exposure. And then the details of the entire policy are also spelled out. Every single minute, it's reconfirming and reaffirming that the criterion, the exchange rate, the meter settings, OSHA HC, nobody changed the policy during the event and all that. So that's a snapshot of that. And then you asked about, here we go. Here is a capture from Eastside Christian Church, just a random report. This one was a scheduled event, so iCal actually told Trend to restart and told Trend to capture this. So this was a pre-configured event. The event was nicknamed the front of house, Sunday, 12 p.m. And this report is showing us, we can skip down to the more paragraph part that explains what happened or what that event experience was like. So down here under Trend, we tried to put it in plain English as best we could. So 21 minutes and 24 seconds of this 1 hour and 24-minute event. So about 20 minutes of an hour and a half long event generated an average of 89 dB. And then we're going to go ahead and compare it to the policy. This was 25 dB under the recommended max. And at 3.8% exposed for this event, the average could have been allowed for 8 hours and 12 minutes. So right there you get the comparison of, if we just ran that 89 dB average continuously, like rock music with no breaks continuously, that you could have done that for 8 hours if that was the only event for that day. And then the flip of that would have been how loud it could have been. And down here on the OSHA slide is where you can see that. And it's pretty insightful. It's more of a fun fact, but it does remind people that our ears can take more than we think, but we should just be responsible with managing it. 19 minutes, this is looking at the OSHA regulation now, which is going to be the most open policy. 19 minutes of this hour and a half generated the 89 like we saw. It could have been allowed for another 7 and 45. And then here's the fun line here. had this been the only exposure event for the day, the entire day, no concerts afterwards, no loud work, that same 20 minutes could have been 113.2 dB, according to OSHA. So it's just looking at these through different lenses to see what the equivalence would be, what the experience actually was when compared to a whole day or when compared to an extremely loud concert. And it gives you like a perspective on how that experience compares.
That's great. We've got a couple questions here, so let me ask you some of these, Chris.
Okay.
A couple questions about meter. So one is, where should a meter be placed in a venue? And I have a follow-up for you after that one. So where is the best
Great.
place?
I
Is
hope you'll
that
chime
front
in.
of house?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I hope you'll chime in with your thoughts on this too. And so much of that really depends on if it's a well-tuned room with good, even coverage and good distribution. And it's a well-designed room that doesn't return reverberant or reflective hotspots and lulls and cancellation and nodes. So I guess that's a way of saying if you have a really rough room and a rough PA, then it should be more meters in more locations. If it's the kind of experience where you're getting up from front of house anyway, and you're going for walks often just to capture, audibly the experience in other areas of the venue, that would lead me to like, well, maybe a few more meters can make your job easier, and you can have it's only up to screen resolution and processing power how many of these you have. So we have had up to 40 of them running on one system before. Now,
Sure.
certainly your room hopefully wouldn't need anything like that, but if you're looking at like multiple campuses or outdoor, indoor, and all that.
Well, and that was our next question. Was, can you have multiple meters in a venue? Can you have two meters, maybe one on the main floor and one on a balcony somewhere?
Right on. That's a perfect scenario, especially when you have different architectural parts of the room that are acoustically building up different frequencies. Maybe you want to look at C weighting up in the balcony if it just acoustically is building up low end. But absolutely. And that can be a mix and match of USB meters, network meters, and different kinds of meters. Like here's, this also talks to Trend. This is the Studio Technologies SPL net, which puts a calibrated microphone on the network, and that can be over PoE or locally injected. There's the same kind of mic that's calibratable mic that's on the end of the USB meter.
And that's doing the same thing.
Yeah.
Is that doing the same thing as the Galaxy meter, where all of the calibration is actually within that SPL unit, and then it's just sending data from there?
That's right. So that expands it to very large rooms, or like the Hollywood Bowl has a few mics that are 700 feet away, and actually one up in the neighborhood, but they all look like, you sprinkle them around on a map and it's all like looking at it very conveniently in the same place.
Sure.
And to just be sure I answered that very first question better, yes, I think the first mic should be at front of house, and hopefully front of house is in a mixed position that resembles the majority of the listening experience. So if that's the case, then I would put the mic number one at front of house, a little bit away from flat surfaces, so you're not getting comb filtering from early reflections, a little bit away from where people in the booth may be talking loud during rehearsals, a little bit away from where the row in front of the booth in applause is not spiking the mic. So consider those kinds of things to kind of preserve the integrity of the mic just picking up the room, but the front of house would be mic number one.
Great. I've got another couple questions along with that. What's the best way to cable a mic that might be 50 feet away? And can you even do a wireless mic? Is that somehow possible?
Wow, cool questions. We've done those. There are really good USB extenders over Cat5 now. My favorite ones are the active ones where the computer port actually drives one end, and then there is a little wall wart at the other end for an active receiver. But USB extensions over Cat5, I would not do the $30 one. I'd be like towards the $200 ones. But then you can go up to your 300 feet over Cat5 wire. And so there is a local power component when you do that to actively do the receiving end. But USB over Cat5 is fine. Let's see, what was the other question about that?
A wireless meter. I know
Yes.
that I think we've done that once before, but can you explain how that would be possible?
Yeah, so that, I've only actually done wireless reliably in a really large space with SPL net. So that gets into some
Sure.
bigger money. But it is treating the actual Ethernet stream like a webcam. And then it's got its own Wi-Fi repeater on it and Bluetooth backup. And it's a rechargeable pack that's about the same size of this. But by the time you put the pack on with it, you probably are good for running around for about a couple of hours, because that pack is also responsible for PoE supplying this whole device. Otherwise, I'd say any of you get back to me with what you find for wireless USB. I would love to try that, and I haven't done that yet, so that could be cool.
Okay, so I've got a couple more questions here, and then maybe we can move along and then answer some of these a little later. But one of them, we were just talking about reports. So with Trend, can you run overlapping reports during a day? So you could have like an entire, a 24-hour report, for instance, and then also an event report for a specific service?
Absolutely. Another great question. Here's one more email that was this one. This is an email report, which means the logs are behind it. The logs are what this comes from. But this one has a whole day in it. Event time elapsed. This is this particular one is 2 hours and 30 minutes of an 8-hour day. And I have other ones that have actually been running continuously for 5 years. So it's pretty interesting just to see for fun what the accumulation is over 5 years. But here's an 8-hour, like a day shift. Maybe this was from rehearsal and then through 3 services to walk out, probably something like that. Out of that whole 8-hour day where you do have the same front of house engineer, the same service caller, 2 hours and 30 minutes of that contributed towards it. And then so you can look at that snapshot, but that was totally concurrent. Up here we can see there's no event in the title. So this is front of house, no event. And it actually was auto exposure too. So this is Canyon Ridge in Vegas. Billy Baker there, they probably don't even know that this is running. But I'm on the email list. So I love getting these kinds of things from around the country, where this particular kind of event is armed with an auto exposure. So you can tell Trend as soon as you've seen 30 minutes of quiet, of levels below the threshold, then arm yourself so the next time you see a loud thing, start a new event. And that can be like totally hands off. So you have that in the background for whenever you care about it. You're capturing these automatically separating logs and events that are simply because, okay, the room took a rest, the new thing will be a new event.
That's great. Let's take a look at a couple more features of Trend before we answer the last couple questions here.
Okay.
Can you show me a Trend beacon window and tell me how that might be used, for instance, at a front of house position?
Great. So like a meter sitting at front of house, you have to glance over at the little LCD or whatever you got. So Trend at least brings those numbers up to your computer screen. Very low processor use. So you've got this window running next to your Spotify and your QLab and your wireless workbench and all that. But furthermore, if we want this to be a little more obvious, we can turn on what I call the beacon. So SPL beacon is going to be the same thing as the numeric display. However, and it'll follow the same colors, so it just makes it a little more obvious when it's green, yellow, and red. And then a feature of this is you can make it any size you want and anywhere you want. So let's put it up here. And I'll quit Trend for a moment. I'll save this. And the file actually includes information about was the beacon open or not, how big was it, and where was it located. So it'll pop right back up where you had it last. And so because that's a separate window, it could be thrown on an external monitor to the OS X or piped into a converter and then show up in the video system and then sent into the corner of a display for like applause-o-meters or scream-o-meters. Like the Superdome has this in the corner of the big scoreboard where they'll let the audience or the packed out stadium see how loud they can actually get the thing to terrifying levels, but it's a fun way to to fuel that fire.
And did you mention before that maybe in Europe you're actually required to display the SPL of a concert?
That's right. There are sometimes it's venue and sometimes it's tour related. So, and that's probably changed since the last I've checked several years ago. But there are some shows that require the entire audience to be able to see how loud things are. And so there are some shows where there'll be flat screen TVs around the front of the stage with something like this, with this beacon in full view, in full screen view, just so the audience can manage themselves what they're being exposed to.
That's great. I wanted to talk about the trend serve monitoring as well as just another way of checking in on the SPL. Maybe if you're walking the house, can you say a little bit about that?
Okay. I just remembered, I put a little thing here to remind me. I just remembered about charts since we were talking about logs in the background.
Sure.
Pull that up
Yeah.
real quick. Great. So these, we don't have to go through these, but just as an example of, because of all the data in the different kinds of logs, you can do any kind of analysis you want to afterwards. So pulling up charts or creating charts like this are really easy, where you can see the peak level compared, the peak cumulative peak compared to the spontaneous peak compared to the cumulative average. And it really is a cool insight into what happened. This one is showing us that the red is an exposure, but this venue, let's see, 904-10. Okay, so this policy must include that you get a free pass every hour. So if you were not in violation or starting to approach a policy restriction, then this venue says, okay, you didn't reach full accumulation, so each hour you get a redo. Here's at the Mercedes. Oh, this one was done at the Mercedes Center. It shows the cumulative average, which is this blue, thicker blue line. So it's cool to see all these levels darting around high and low, but the cumulative average as it walks up and actually starts to tame out. You know, it responds violently at the beginning, but because it's cumulative, it decelerates in velocity. And then ends up showing exactly what the average was at the end. So all of these kinds of charts can be generated from the chart data. That's just another one with that TWA average again. That's the main line. Oh yeah, and real quick, Water of Life. My friend Marvin Simpson over there, they wanted to see A and C together. So this answered an earlier question. So we put 2 meters on there. One pin to A, one pin to C. And for the first time for them, they were able to see the difference between A and C, which is also revealing of how much low-end material or how great their subs are. And then we were seeing a 9 dB difference between A and C very consistently for them with 2 meters. So that's been some fun data. All right, that was a long way around to your question about serve, okay? Options, parameters, password for the OS. Built in for free is this, our 2 trend servers actually. One of them we can manually configure down here, which is a way to talk to another program called TRENDview. So TRENDview can run on another computer anywhere on the same network and will show the meter in real time as if you're in front of the actual trend. So that is included for free, and here you get to pick the port for your, if your IT department is managing your network down to the port level. You turn that on, and then you're sending to, so I'll open an instance of that right now. Here's Web View, which is TRENDview, which is a separate app. And now we have a second meter. Of course, I'm on the same computer, so my latency is incredibly low. But this is usable. Let's say you want trend running up in a server room or with your management. You don't want all these settings or to rely on a computer that's sitting, a laptop balancing in front of house. Bolt that down and put TRENDview out at front of house if it's a guest mix position or something like that. And then in addition, always running in the background is a basic web page server. So the only thing needed there is, let's look at my network settings real quick. This computer is running trend on a computer that has the IP address of 192 blah, blah, blah. So I'm going to go to my phone real quick. I'm going to type in that IP address. And then hard coded in there is port 5000. So I'm going to type in this computer's address, :5000. And as soon as I do that, and so my iPhone is on the same Wi-Fi network that this computer is on. So because they're on the same network, we have a 1 second self-refreshing web page that is showing in live, except for the 1 second refresh latency, the live level. And I'll do something really loud for a second here. Really loud, something louder, 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 louder. And then you can, iPad or iPhone or another computer, any web page can get a glimpse of what the levels are, even if you're not on the trend system at all.
That's great. So between TRENDview and the web page update, you could have management or someone else be able to peek in real quick at the real-time levels.
That's right.
That's great. All right. We are getting towards the Q&A portion here. I do see a couple questions here, but I'll say if anyone wants to ask your questions, please input them into the Q&A here. I've got a fun one for you, Chris. What's the highest SPL ever measured or reported with trend? Is that a number you know off the top of your head?
I think it was 139, and I'm not sure if that's because of the theoretical maximum of 140 or the dynamic range of equipment capability itself. I know you can force both of these mics. Well, this one not. Let's see. Yeah, this USB one would max out at 110, and then you would start seeing readings that would start to look like compression, but they're actually clipping. The actual
Gotcha.
preamp in the system is limiting. But the SPL that can be slid up in range, and I know it has been used in automotive too, where you see some of these car stereo shootouts where they're claiming 155. It's like theoretical stuff.
Sure.
but I haven't actually had trend in any of those environments, but I've seen 139, and that was with SPLNet. And that was also a very close range playing with new M noise, using M noise to see how loud things can actually get before they collapse.
Sure.
So we have smart running, but also SPL on the side because of the calibration. So I'm going to say 139. That's too loud.
I've got a question from Matt here. Is TRENDview a paid app, or is that included for free with a copy of Trend?
TRENDview is free. You'll get that free with it.
That's great. A question about exposure guidelines. Are those typically per calendar day, or is that going to be a rolling 24-hour, like whenever a show begins? And then another question is, are there exposure limit guidelines per week or a string of days as well?
Wow, these are good questions. There are still some variation in opinions, but the deepest I've been able to go in like the policy standards, what they're trying to express is that you have time to recover, that you have time to heal. So it would be after a good night's sleep, technically.
Sure.
There is a TTS, temporary threshold shift. You know, if I banged a couple of pipes together, my ears are going to ring and compress, and the muscles will tighten down and give me 15 dB of instantaneous. I can't think of the actual word for that. But it'll be a threshold shift where they'll be more immune to the next impact. And that alone can take 2 to 6 hours to release.
Wow.
And that's within a day. That's within the waking hours of a day. But if you're exposed to something that's 100% of OSHA permissible exposure limits, your head would be tight, your ears would be ringing, you would be fatigued, and you would have to sleep that off. So I don't know about anything about multiple days yet. I know there is a healthy rhythm to having some days off in a week that is mentioned in a bulletin, but it's not official. So the only official is that 24 hours, but management would want to know that you're sleeping before the next 24 hours.
Sure. Well, and I think a good conversation here as well is, first, OSHA, this is implying workplace safety. And so that's the policy that we're using here. But a lot of times when we're talking about SPL exposure, we're typically referring to an audience.
That's right.
But it's also important. So for instance, maybe a house of worship service on a weekend, but it's also important to think of the tech crew and their entire day, that they might be working 3 or 4 shows back to back, or all of sound check plus the show. And is that where the 8-hour time limit really is more important than maybe a 1-hour performance?
Absolutely. And I like thinking about all this, that I just want to impress OSHA if they walked in. And they won't walk in with jurisdiction, but if there was a complaint or concern or something, it's just cool that we're above that bar already when they walk in. So I guess just overarching saying that is we're not subject to them. It's not in jurisdiction, but we're already exceeding their expectations. They should be impressed when we walk in because we have this information. So there are several 1 and 2 and 3 hour shows that just really don't care about how bad they're going to hurt you because you bought tickets to get hurt. Like,
Sure.
There are some shows you just know you're going to get hurt. They're going to give it to you. It's going to be amazing. And you're going to pay a small price. And OSHA technically is, that jurisdiction isn't even established yet. It needs to be regulated. That whole field is still settling. And I do think there's some stuff coming sooner than later that's going to help say, this is crossing the line. This is going to cost you some money if you're going to do this. This does require you to have an attorney on your team because it's dangerous. So there'll be some of that coming sooner than later, I think. I think I got off the subject just a little bit. Besides just the event itself, is absolutely to run both concurrently is the most responsible for a venue. What's happening to an attendee or a ticket payer, but what is happening to that front of house engineer that's been there from rehearsal all the way through multiple shows. That would be more of the occupational health and safety. Is the employer or management taking care of their staff? And a front of house engineer is a little bit different because you could use the TWA to say, OSHA, it's about here where OSHA would say we need to engage in a hearing conservation program. And that program means more breaks. but it also means wearing hearing protection, which is the lighting
Sure.
person can, but the front of house person, can't. So it'd be literally the front of house engineer where they're in front of the assault of the whole system for the most number of hours of the day, who can't wear hearing protection. That is the point. How long was your day? How many shows like this have you done? And that's where like companies like Disney care. That's where they'll put the badge on to the front of house person because of the number of shows and longer than 8-hour shifts and all of that, and cheering crowds. That's an interesting one too, is it's
Sure.
not just what you put through the PA that you're responsible for. It's because you've created an event that drew a bunch of people who are excited and are adding to the noise. So that's all great,
Yeah.
but it is also noise exposure to that front of house engineer above and beyond anything that he has control over, he or she has control over. So
Sure. So I've got a couple other announcements that I'd like to add, but before we go there, let's talk about TRENDpro really quick. So everything that we've seen so far has been a trend, the standard trend software. But what are the add-ons with TRENDpro? And then is there frequency band specific metering that you can do as well with that?
great. Pardon me. Here's the TRENDpro view, and it explodes several of the parameters into more than some of us might care to look at. More about the count up and count down timers, but the power of TRENDpro would start to lean into exposure targeting. It's something I created for flipping this whole thing on its head. Instead of saying, let's mix under a certain level, instead, let's say, well, why don't you tell me how loud I can get and how long can I do it? And then how will I know that I deliver all of that energy and stay completely in compliance at the end of the day? So TRENDpro has exposure targeting, where it takes all of the parameters and values and measurements that we have, including how long the show's going to be. And as soon as you have that, you can throw a new dart out there of, well, then my average needs to equal X. And I can achieve that average with some loud things and some quiet things. And now it's this push-pull towards a target. And the target will be in compliance. So that's probably the main point I would make about TRENDpro. It's for mixing loud. It's for mixing as loud as you're allowed to, and it's ensuring everyone can look at the same screen. Management, anybody's all looking at the same screen, saying yes, you are very loud, but you are still 100% in policy compliance. There'll be no $15,000 fee tonight. Things like that.
That's great.
In addition, TRENDpro is required to run the SPL net. The licensing for the network-based mics, I think I saw that question earlier. The licensing for the network-based mic systems is a next level thing. So TRENDpro is required for SPL net. And
yeah,
you asked one more question about
frequency band specific metering.
Thank you for that. This frequency band, once you're into SPL net, it's actually returning third band information, all the bands simultaneously, 8 times a second. It's a whole lot of data flying around that we can get to. So we can take this entire meter, if I had SPLNet connected in the frequency license unlocked, and I could click use frequency and pick my band, and the entire meter would turn into the same thing as one band of an RTA, a third or an octave wide. And that can be handy for like hybrid applications. Like Red Rocks uses A slow, but also uses ISO octave 63.
Wow.
So it's 2 meters running side by side. One's looking at the subs, one's looking at A slow, and then they're blended back together in a management view. And that's where you can see that how much you're annoying the neighbors, plus how responsible you're being for the health of mid-range frequencies for listening.
That's
Good
great.
question.
All right. I think that is it for the presentation. So I do have a couple of announcements here for everyone. I'm going to share my screen now. So you guys should be seeing that. I do want to mention that Trend Standard has recently had a price increase to $689 for the package, which does include the meter and the Trend soft license. But for everyone on today's webinar, we are going to be extending the previous pricing of $599 as an exclusive offer to everyone here for the next 30 days. So feel free to email us, ask questions about Trend. I have here as well. Make sure you stay up to date on the howloudisIt.com website. We have on the support page there is the latest versions of Trend, but also you can download Trend and use it in a free demo version on a Mac OS X for 30 minutes, I believe. Is that right, Chris?
That's correct.
Yeah. So if you want to try out Trend, you can download it on your computer and test it out. If you have questions for us, please you can email Gille here at gille@houseright.com, or you can email me at bgrahn@tcfurlong.com. Before we leave, I'd also like to make an announcement that TC Furlong is happy to announce that we're going to be moving our 10th annual virtual digital console expo to a fully virtual event this year. It's going to happen December 1st through the 3rd. So we're really excited to showcase 8 of the leading digital console manufacturers over a 3-day virtual event. There's going to be a mix of different presentations, some Q&A breakout sessions. So as you leave this webinar, there will be an exit survey. There will be a chance to sign up for the Virtual Digital Console Expo 2020 there as well. So Chris, thank you so much for today's webinar. It's been very helpful getting into the specifics of Trend. And we really are happy to have you here with us today.
Thank you so much, Brian, and the whole TC Furlong team. You guys are so great. I was excited when you asked, and excited to get to share and learn from each other on all of this and included in how we can all be more professional. But I love working with you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and hopefully we can do a TRENDpro webinar here in the future at some point.
Bring it on. Be great.
Yeah. I'd also like to thank Matt Collera with the TC Furlong team. He's been facilitating the technical side of today's webinar in the background. We appreciate your help as always, Matt. As I mentioned, there is a brief exit survey when you leave. So feel free to drop any additional questions that you might have there, or you can send us an email. You can also email us here at sales@tcfurlong.com. So thanks everyone for coming today.